We're in the beginning of the book of Shemot, and last week we just started this story, so I want to continue from where we were last week. So if you'll turn to page 326 in the Chumash. Did everybody get a Chumash? If not, there are a few floating around. (326), chapter 3. Yeah, there was a big crate of them. Where did they go? Yeah, they're going to get some more, so we'll bring some more in. Okay. Good, but you need help? You got it? Okay. Take the one with all 5 books in it. (326), chapter 3. All right, I suggested last week that the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, is really the book of Jewish identity. That the purpose of this book is to wrestle with the question, who are we? And to answer that question, who are we and who are we to each other? And if you think about the various contexts in which this book was formulated, so it's going to tell us the story of our experience in Egypt and coming out of Egypt. The first moment, I think, as the people of Israel formed into a nation under King David, there's a question of who are we? Are we members of tribes or are we members of a nation? What does it mean to be a member of a nation? What do we mean to each other? At a later point in Jewish history, when the kingdom of Judea is destroyed and we're taken to exile, which the scholars tell us is the time when the Bible was put together, the Torah was edited together. So you have an exiled people sitting by the waters of Babylon, asking, who are we? The purpose of taking us to Babylon was to erase that identity. And this community had the wherewithal to reassert the identity and using the narrative of the story to reassert the identity. So as a diaspora people, who are we? And then at later points in history to come back and say, who are we? What is the nature of this people? And even today, it's a very serious kinds of question. Like, what does it mean to say, I'm Jewish? Who are we? What is the connection? What are we to each other? What are we to Jews around the world? What are we to the state of Israel? And what makes us Jewish? What is the ish part of this Jewish thing? So the first answer we saw was this question was family. Eilish Shmot Bnei Israel, these are the children of Jacob, who went down into Egypt and became a great people. We are family to each other, and family has certain obligations and responsibilities in a certain sense, right? Family are the people you can't stand but are forced to eat Thanksgiving dinner with, right? That's family. Family are the people, said Robert Frost, who have to let you in when you bang on the door. That's who family is. And we have a family sense. And then the next set of stories had to do with the narrative of slavery. We're not just a family. We are people who share a common narrative. One of the problems with the family narrative is you can't join a family. You can sit at the table, but you'll always be the son-in-law. And you'll never know the inner life of the family. You'll always be one step removed. They can be very welcoming. My in-laws are tremendously welcoming. But there's a connection at that table that I'll never enjoy. But when you say instead that what unites us together is a shared narrative, a shared experience, and that what I'm asked to do to join this people is to tell that narrative in the first person. To tell that narrative in the first person, now suddenly I can join the people. I can join this people because I can identify with the narratives. Historical experience becomes personal memory. In every generation you say, I came out of Egypt. That's the password. That's the way in. If you're willing to say, my biography begins with the experience of Egyptian slavery, and I was there when we escaped, and I was at the Red Sea, then you're part of the Jewish people. And that carries a whole set of ethical responsibilities, as we'll see as we get farther into the Torah, because again and again and again you're going to be told to do something because you were a slave in the land of Egypt. You're going to be told to treat people in a certain way because you were a slave in the land of Egypt. You're going to be told to vote and act and spend against your own interests. Why? Because you understand what happens in a world that's ruled only by self-interest. A world ruled by self-interest ends up owning people. Your humanity begins at the boundary of self. When you say, I have compassion and empathy for the other, because I was a slave in Egypt, I see myself in their suffering, and suddenly a human soul is born, a nation's soul is born out of the experience of Egypt. That's the second identity piece. That's our identity. Now, today, we're going to take a look at another identity, which is a really curious one. Who's God? Now, just for narrative's sake, when was the last time in the Torah somebody talked to God? No, we're in Moses. Before Moses. We're in chapter 3 on page 326. No, Abraham talked to God. Isaac talked to Jacob. Jacob talked to him, which was a while ago, right? And what did God tell him? Go to Egypt. I'll protect you. I'll get you out of there. But it's been a while now since anyone has chatted with the Lord. Right? It's been a long time. And now this God fellow shows up in the narrative again. So we're on page 326, chapter 3. Everybody good? Michelle, come in, make yourself at home. Moses, Moshe haya roe et son yitro chotno. Kohen Midian. Moses was the shepherd of the sheep of Yitro, his father-in-law, who was Kohen Midian, was the chief priest of the Midianites. He was exchange. In other words, he had a very good job. He had a very comfortable job. He had a very lovely designer tent in a nice neighborhood. He had a nice German car and a Japanese television set. He had a pretty wife and 2 kids in private school. He was living a quiet life. The life that he wanted. He was living this life. He doesn't want anything else. Everything he wanted in life, he found in life. This should be the end of the story. He ran away. He found the life he wanted. Genug, enough, right? He drove the flocks into the wilderness and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God, which means that Horeb, it's either called Horeb or Sinai. It flips depending on which narrative you're in. This was considered a sacred place even before. This was sort of like one of these places. There's these places in the world which are sacred even before anybody gets there. Sedona, Arizona. They're sacred before anybody builds a hotel. Sorry?
It's the Native American crossroads of the world.
Yeah, and it's also, there's something spooky about this place, right? So Horeb is one of these places, right? An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. Vayareb malach Adonai elav belavat esh mitoch hasneh. Hasneh, the bush. The bush? Like what bush? The bush. So you get the image of what? That he wasn't looking for this thing. He was looking for sheep. And he comes across what? Bush. Right? And he gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Now, our friend Larry Kushner once wrote a lovely midrash. He said he was sitting in front of his campfire one day, in front of his fireplace one day, and it suddenly occurred to him that in order to know that a bush is not being consumed, how long do you have to watch it? No, seriously. It takes a certain kind of perception. Remember we talked before that in chapter 2 it was all about the word ro'eh? The birth mother sees ki tovu, and the adopted mother is the one who sees him in the bulrushes and takes him and says, this is a Hebrew baby. We talked about that last week at length. And then it's Moses who sees ish mitzri makeh ish ivri. He sees the humanity in these 2 people engaged in a terrifying encounter. And now we get one more ro'eh. What does he see? A bush burning, it doesn't burn up. It's a very, very interesting symbol. But just the simplest part is, how long do you have to watch it? Most people, according to the Midrash, right, that bush had been there since creation. That bush is on the corner of 42nd and 5th in Manhattan. That bush is on the corner of Ventura and Sepulveda. That bush has been burning that spot for 1,000, million people walk by and said, oh, there's a bush afire. Only one guy comes along and says, and I quote, Isn't that it? You have to see something. He sees something that nobody else sees. And Moses said, I'll turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't that bush burn up? And that, when the Lord saw that he turned aside, see, it was this transaction. You have to see it. Does he have eyes? Does he have the kind of patience it takes to see? God calls him and says, Moshe, Moshe. And he answered, here I am. And he said, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place you stand is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. It's an interesting fact. I am the God of your father, whom he never really had that much of a close relationship with, right? He should have said his mother is what he should have said. And then it's Adonai, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Then why does it say the God of your father? So there's a very famous midrash that the reason it says that, how did Moses know it was God talking? Put it this way, when they made the movie Prince of Egypt, we're going to meet the director, right? The last scene they were trying to figure out was this scene, because they had to figure out who's the voice of God. Right, well, it would be obvious, James Earl Jones, right? I am your father, Luke Skywalker, right? If you haven't seen the new movie, don't. Go see the old one twice. It's just the same movie. They've just remade it, and it's not nearly as good, right? But more expensive. What? It wasn't terrible, but it's not terrible, but it's the same movie, right?
Scene by scene.
It's scene by scene the same movie, right? They wanted James Earl Jones, but then they had all these feminists who said, no, you can't cast a male voice for God. So then they said, well, we'll cast a female voice. So I said, Kathleen Turner, it's as close to God as I ever aspired to be, right? Charlize Theron, that would be fine by me, right? They said, no, that God is. Then they were going to have a chorus. But the problem is the whole story is about monotheism. So how could you have, right? And then you wonder, what accent would he speak? We want him to speak in a British accent. Because Americans, when they hear that, now British, same way. British people distinguish between ups and upper accent. Americans, when we hear a British accent, we automatically pay attention. Right? People can say the stupidest things with a British accent, and we say, oh my God, that's so true. Right? I mean, it's amazing. We just are just suckers for that, right? So come on in, we got room. We got Jews, we got room, we got Chumash, come in. No, come over here. Can you guys smoosh out? Come on. We got Nema Bissell. Eddie Redmayne, right. What? Eddie Redmayne, boy and girl, right. Right, there you go. Tom Hanks, Then you figure what accent? Samuel L. Jackson, that's a scary God, I mean, it's interesting. So in the end, there's the midrash was, why did the voice stop Moses in his tracks? Because it was the voice of his father. And that's why it says, I am the God of your father. He heard the voice of his father calling. And then he says, no, I'm not the voice of your father. I'm the voice of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's a gloss on that one which says it's not the voice of his father, but it's his own voice. That it wasn't the voice of his father, but it was his own voice he heard. So when they did the movie, they used Val Kilmer's voice for the voice of God. And I'm told that in the original movie, that's Charlton Heston's voice, slowed down one octave. Is it Cecil B. DeMille's voice? You think so? Look this up, right? He would want it to be, but I am the God. So, and Moses hid his face, and God continued, I have marked well the plight of my people. Ra'o ra'iti. Remember, the whole narrative up to now has been about what is ro'eh. What do you see? What does the mother see? What does Moses see? Now God says, Ra'o ra'iti. I have seen the plight of my people and have heeded their outcry because of the taskmasters. I am mindful of their suffering. So what's the question you're asking right away if you're reading the narrative? Where have you been so long? What, now you saw it? Now you saw it? What was it that turned God to see it all of a sudden? What was it that turned God to see it all of a sudden? So for just a moment, turn back to 326 and look at the verse at the top of the page. Or look at 325, the last verse, which is 223. Ready? It says, Vayehi bayamim harabim lahem. A long time after that, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out, and their cry for help from bondage rose up to God. God heard their moaning. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites and took notice of them. All of a sudden? Why all of a sudden? Well, one of the answers is they never cried out before. They only cried out when the king died. When Pharaoh imposed slavery, they didn't cry out. When Pharaoh took their children and threw them into the Nile, they didn't cry out. Why not?
They were slaves.
So what? Slaves don't cry out? You're right, but what happens? What happens to them? What happened to them? What is the nature of slavery? Michael, hang on a second. Michelle.
It beats the humanity out of yourself. Yourself, I shouldn't say humanity. It beats out your intent, It diminishes you as a human.
So what happens to the slave? The slave over time becomes the slavery, becomes the slave. The slave identifies with his position as the slave and cannot imagine anything else. And because he cannot imagine anything else, he can't think outside the condition of the slavery, and so doesn't complain about it. It's what you are. It's what you are, and there's no alternative in the world. It's what you are, and all you hope for is an easier day tomorrow than you had yesterday. It's what you are. And if you're the victim of genocide, it's what you are. And you come to expect that as the normal case of things. We talked before about ish ivri makeh ish ivri. Ish mitzri makeh ish ivri. This becomes normal. You don't see what's normal. Culture is that which you don't see. In the 1950s and the 1940s, black folks walked into a bus station or a train station in most American cities, and there were bathrooms for coloreds and bathrooms for whites and drinking fountains for coloreds and drinking fountains for white, and schools for people of color and schools for white people, and that's the way the world was, and nobody saw it. Nobody even saw it until when Rosa Parks says, "I'm not getting off the bus." And then your eyes are open. Look, I went to Charles Evans Hughes Junior High School in Woodland, California in 1966. Seventh graders were divided. Girls took home ec, cooking and sewing. Boys took wood shop, electric shop, metal shop, and print shop. Because men have to know how to use a lathe. Only women have to know how to sew buttons and cook meals. How many buttons and meals have I cooked since then, and how many lathes have I touched since? You don't want me near a lathe. That's what the metal shop teacher said. Feinstein, get off of that lathe. You'll kill somebody. But that was the way the world was until Betty Friedan said, "Huh?" Right? I mean, you didn't see it. Nobody saw it. Girls went to college not to get a BA, but an MRS degree. We didn't see it. And up until very recently, two gay people had to hide. We didn't want to see, we didn't see it. And if we saw it, it was disgusting. It was perversion, right? You don't see it. They became slaves. What happens to them, though? The king dies. And what happens to them? Suddenly, there's this maybe a rush of optimism, and something changes, and they grow. For the first time, they cry. For the first time they cry. And when they cry, God cries. When they cry, God cries. Because somehow the spell of the normal is broken. Go ahead, Farzan.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they were also assimilated enough in the community that they didn't think about God.
Well, that's very interesting. They didn't think about God. They didn't think about being free. They thought they weren't slaves. They thought they were serving a bigger, greater Egypt. They didn't think of themselves as slaves. They didn't know they were slaves. The worst part of slavery is when the slave doesn't know he's a slave. And you come and you say, I've come to liberate you. And their answer is, from what? Right? I've come to liberate you from what? In my house, this part of the story at the Seder table always occasions a discussion of the movie The Matrix, which in my house is Holy Scripture. Right? Because the question is, do you take the blue pill or the red pill? The blue pill puts you back into your slavery, and you'll never know you're a slave. You live a happy slave idiot life. The red pill gives you the agony of consciousness. Which do you want? The truth or the comfort? It's an interesting debate at my table. We always put blue pills and red pills on everybody's table. Right? So God says, now I'm ready to free them. Now they're ready to be freed. We'll find that out, by the way. Right? And I'll take them to back on 328. I'll take them to a land that's good and spacious, flowing with milk and honey, the Canaanites, the Hittites, all the other ites. And the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I've seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you will free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt. Now, 5 times Moses is going to refuse. Let's notice what he says. Time number 1. Who am I? Mi anochi. Now remember I told you, the questions are what the text is always about. The text was written around the question. Mi anochi. Who am I? That's the question. Who are you, Moses? That's been the whole question since the beginning of this narrative. Who are you? Where do you belong? Which world do you belong in? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites? Who am I? Now, what's the answer to that question? Yeah, he doesn't answer it. He answers obliquely. And he goes sort of sideways. I'll be with you. Meaning, it's not you who's going to do this. You're just a messenger. I'm sending you. I'll be with you. And that'll be the sign you bring them to this mountain. All right, here's refusal number 2 at verse 13. Moses said, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent you, they will ask, what is his name? What do I say? No, don't turn the page. That's too precious. That's precious. What is his problem? Why is he worried? First of all, what is he worried about? Is he worried about, you're going to the most powerful man in the world, somebody who murders with impunity before lunch, but he's not worried about going in front of Pharaoh. Who's he worried about? Jews, right. Going in front of Pharaoh and demanding a political resolution, piece of cake. It's going in front of Jews. It's standing at a board meeting that'll scare the pants off of you, right? He's worried about his own people. And he says to them, they're going to want to know who you are. What does it mean to say, what is your name? What does it mean to ask God, what is your name? What does it mean to ask anybody, what is their name? Now, notice what happens. The first question was, Mi anochi, who am I? The second question is, who are you? Who are you? You're going to go with me? Who the heck are you? Now, what is he really worried about? They're going to ask me what's his name. So there's 3 different ways to think about this. Number 1, they've had people come before and say, I've come to liberate you. How do you know it's really God who sent the guy? Give me the password. We Jews have a secret password. You all know that, right? That we can tell you're Jewish, right? I said, right? We can tell you. What?
You smell it.
You smell it. My mother could smell it. My mother got on a cruise boat and she knew every Jew on that boat. Right? She knew and people who didn't look, you know. I mean, she knew every person, what summer camp they went to, right? Where their mother was born. My mother just knew this. She had Judar. I mean, it was amazing. She did. 2,500 people on a cruise boat. She knew all the Jews by the first dinner, right? It was terrible. He's afraid that they're going to say, how do we know you're authentic? He wants the password. Now think about that. What does that mean? That means that sometime in your upbringing as a Jew, they whisper in your ear at your bar mitzvah. Maybe that's what the rabbi says to the kid when he puts his arm around him, right? Right? Henry, today you're a bar mitzvah. Here's the password. Don't tell. Don't tell the goyim, you know? Is that what he wants? Is that what, tell me your name, they know it, and if I don't know it, they won't accept me? Then the question is, how come he doesn't know it? Well, it's because he was raised in a Jewish household until he was a kid, but he never got to his bar mitzvah. So they never whispered the password? Is that the problem? Right? Or here's the second possibility. They don't know it either. They don't know it either. And they want to know, who is this God? It's been a long time since we've had connection with this God. And then there's one more. There's a third possibility, which I think is the best of the three. What is he really asking? This is his religious quest. Who are you? Moses is going to ask God that question several times in the narrative. Most principally the one right after the golden calf story, when he says to God, show me your essence. Show me your glory. Harini kvodecha. Who are you? What kind of God are you? Now, why is it a question, what kind of God are you? Because this God already confounds all of the categories. Number one, gods in the ancient world were local. There's a God of Canaan. You don't meet the God of Canaan in Egypt. You meet Egypt in Egypt. Right? The God of Tarzana doesn't transfer to Encino. I'm sorry. Once you come to Encino, you can bring him with you, but only as a secondary God. You have to worship the God of Encino first. Right? That's classic paganism. What do you mean you're here? What are you doing here? God, you belong in Canaan. What are you doing here? That's the first question. But then there's even a deeper question. What does it mean if a God says, my people are enslaved? What does it mean to be the God of an enslaved people? A God of enslaved people is an enslaved God. What kind of God lets his people be enslaved? You see the problem? Only a very weak God would let his people be enslaved. If he were really a strong God, he would have protected his people. Better, he would have had his people triumph over their slave man. They would have been victorious. In that world, the political fate of a people is indicative of the power of the God. The conqueror's God is the real God. What kind of God wants to be the God of slaves? What kind of Nebuchadnezzar God is a God of slaves? What kind of God is a God of slaves? And you're going to free them from Pharaoh? What? This is a weak people, and you're a weak God. So what is your name? This is a very serious question. And then, if you're not a weak God, why are you here? Why have you waited so long to free your people? This is a very interesting inquiry. Michael and then Mark.
The strange conundrum is that it appears if you read it over and over again, that God is a mirror image of the people. It's a mirror image of Moses.
Yeah.
Because when Moses killed that Egyptian,
Right.
the first thing the Hebrews said to him was, who made you king?
Right.
And this is a parallel to that.
Right.
So God becomes a mirror image of me speaking to God, because that's the only image or mirror image of my Father.
Right.
That's the only image that I can see, because this is an incorporeal God.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the notion of that the God you worship is the world you live in.
Yeah.
So Moses's fear, his running away, his reticence that's what he's questioning. He's questioning, it's a sort of psychoanalysis, he's questioning himself. Mark.
Yeah, I think the fourth idea here that may clear it up is that it's not a story about Moses learning things. It's a story about God learning things.
Okay.
The idea that all of this is an education of Moses is one view, and it is in a way. My view is that this is the very first time that he even understands that he's Jewish. He has a son, he doesn't circumcise him until chapter 4.
Yeah.
He doesn't know that he's Jewish until the bush. So this is his arrival at understanding that he's Jewish. But his complaint to God, who picked Moses because he wants the people to be free, and there's only one Jew who was never a slave.
Right.
So Moses was the only one who picked.
Right.
Moses is the only one also, certainly between God and Moses, he's the only one of the two who understands what it will take to free slaves. God has this bizarre idea coming up in the next verse. Well, you just go and tell him.
Right.
Say, I'm God, and get out.
Right.
And Moses says, well, but I need a sign.
Right.
And that introduces the cancer of the Torah.
Right.
Which is the addiction to power and the corruptions of power.
Okay.
Because then that explains Meribah, and it explains why Moses hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. And it all evolves out of this fact that God had no idea what it was to be a slave, as you'd expect.
Right.
And Moses had no idea what it was to be.
Is it that God has no idea to be a slave, or do you think that it's God has no idea how human beings like Pharaoh in power situations are going to respond? God anticipates that Moses is going to stand in front of Pharaoh. Moses is going to say, in the name of the God of the universe, let my people go. And Pharaoh is going to say, okay.
Right.
It never occurred to God that Pharaoh would say, who the hell are you? that he would deny it. So this is the political education of the Lord.
So what is your name?
Yeah.
It's actually a request to God of what is your power.
Right. What is your
Because
essence?
nomen est nomen. The power is the name.
Right. Now, by the way, just to unpack one of Mark's ideas. So Moses is a unique character, and you will see this in a moment. And the Sfat Emet, Hasidic fellows, commentators, he'll say that they didn't become aware of their slavery until Moses shows up. Because who is Moses? He looks enough like them that they can identify with him, but he's different because he's not a slave. Right? He's the only liberated human being in the community. And when they look at him and they compare themselves to him, they say, oh my God, look what's happened to us. Look what's happened to us. Right? And that's part of the drama. So now, Moses says, who are you? And this is this transaction, this learning. Turn the page, and now we get this very weird answer. And a lollipop to anybody who could figure this answer out. And why this answer should satisfy anybody. But you see, the narrator has a huge problem now. What's the narrator's problem? Moses said, what's your name? And the narrator has to give you an answer. If you're writing the movie, you got to have the next scene. So he can't give an answer because what are you going to name God? Right? So he gives him an answer. And God said to Moses, Ehiyeh, Asher Ehiyeh. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you see the translation, top page 330? When the translator doesn't even translate the thing and just gives you the Hebrew transliterated, that means he don't know what it means either. Right? My professor, H.L. Ginsberg, who did this, very, very, very smart Bible scholar, there were certain things where he just said, you know. God says to Ehiyeh Asher Ehiyeh. Translation. Ehiyeh literally means I will be. Asher, what? I will be. What does that mean? I will be what I will be. And he continued, thus you will say to the Israelites, Ehiyeh, meaning I will be, sent me to you. What? Oh, that's going to work. Right? Only, I don't know, listening to the political campaign, people believe all sorts of stuff. So, you know, that would be great for a political campaign, right? Ehiyeh, my party. Go ahead. What does it mean, Douglas?
It means you can't know it.
You can't know it.
It means that you, as a human being who is finite, are incapable of understanding something that is beyond finite.
Yeah.
And you can't get the concept of infinity.
But why does that satisfy Moses, or should that satisfy Moses' request for something to give the people that they will believe him, that he's an authentic representative of the God of their ancestors, or that they should take a chance? Look, remember what you're talking about here, right? For a slave to stand up and say, okay, I'm not a slave anymore, means he's chancing death. Why should I believe you? Why should I believe you? Right? We know how the story ends, so we know, oh, they should have believed him. But you're taking a huge chance, right? Take a look a little farther. The Lord, say to the Israelites, the Lord God of your fathers, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right, that they can understand, has sent me to you. That'll be my name. Go assemble the elders and give them the speech. And he says, yet I know that the king of Egypt isn't going to listen to you. Turn to page 332, chapter 4. Moses spoke up. This is number 3. Moses said, what if they don't believe me and they don't listen to me? A second time, what is he worried about? Is he worried about Pharaoh? No. What is he worried about? You. Because you people are so damn hard to lead. Pharaoh will take care of Pharaoh. And now God gets angry at him, right? The Lord said, what's in your hand? He says, it's a rod. Cast it on the ground. He cast it, it became a snake. Moses says, put your hand. The stick. Pretty cool trick. Magic tricks. That's what people want. People want magic tricks. Got a better one. You don't like a card? No, how about this one? Look at verse 6. Put your hand into your bosom. He put his hand and he took it out. His hand was encrusted with snowy scales. Now, two symbols, right? The snake and leprosy. What do they have in common? Why those two symbols? Why not make it thunder? Make the stock market rise and fall, right? They're both scary things. That's true. In the context of the Torah, snakes and leprosy are both things that disqualify you from participating in the holy. They both represent death, right? So when we get to Leviticus in about some weeks from now, we get stuck in Leviticus. Snakes and leprosy are two things that disqualify you from participating in the life of the community, the religious life of the community. They're scary things because they represent death. Snowy means you're white, you look like you're dead. Snake represents, instant death. These are dead. This is death. These are symbols, magic tricks. Is that going to convince anybody? Do magic tricks work? And then there's the last time. Come one more time. Verse 3, page 334. Here's the fourth one. Ready? But Moses said to the Lord, please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in time past or now that you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And God says, who gives man speech? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Right? Go, I'll be with you as you speak. And he says, please, Lord, make somebody else your agent. Somebody else. I don't want it. Right? And the Lord became angry with Moses. This is the first time God becomes angry in the Bible. Why is he angry with Moses? And it took 5 different refusals before God gets angry. Why is God angry? Why is God angry?
Because Moses is the reluctant. He's supposed to be the hero of the story, but is refusing to take the reins.
Doesn't.
He becomes a reluctant hero.
Yeah.
And this follows a typical, mythological paradigm.
Right.
Where you have the reluctant hero, you have the mentor, which happens to be God.
Right.
In this instance, and it requires all of these different things in order to open his eyes to what is going on.
Yeah. And in the pantheon of biblical heroes, you ever have anybody like this?
No.
Noah?
No.
Abraham? No. Isaac? Jacob? Did anybody say no? This is the first guy to say no. Right? He argues with him, but he doesn't refuse to go. On the contrary, Abraham accepts the mission.
He wasn't supposed to go. It wasn't him who was going to go kill the son of Gomorrah.
Yeah.
It was the angel who was supposed to do it. He tried to stop the angel.
Yeah.
He said, God, no.
Yeah, but that's different than saying, I don't want the job. God comes to Abraham and says, be my God, go, follow me to Canaan, leave your home, follow me to Canaan, I will be with you, you'll be a blessing. Abraham said, nah, I like it here in Ur. Short Bible. 5 times Moses says, I don't want the job, go get somebody else. Yeah, go ahead.
Yoda sees something in Luke Skywalker that he doesn't see in himself.
Yeah, which is what?
Well, he sees the character of Moses that Moses doesn't see. He doesn't see his own internal strength.
So Moses is also a slave.
He doesn't see what his capacity is.
Okay.
God sees that capacity in Moses, and Moses has yet to learn that.
Right, just to give you the irony of the piece, I'll be right with you. Look at verse 10. If anybody reads Hebrew, look at verse 10, right? Vayomer Moshe Adonai, be Adonai, please God. Lo ish dvarim anochi. Now, when we were kids, he was a speech impediment. But it's deeper than that. It's much. Lo ish dvarim anochi means what? I have no words. I'm not a man of words. What does Moses do for a living? He spends all of his time with sheep. You don't talk to sheep, or if you do, they don't talk back very much, right? I mean, he's entering re-entering the social world where words have to determine the fate of peoples. That's not his world. Look, I'm not a public man. I'm not a public man. Leave me alone. I'm not a man who has anything to say. I'm a shallow, hollow man. I have nothing to say. What's going to happen, by the way, and this is the great question of the Torah, is if you go ahead all the way, come back in July, when we finally get to Devarim, the end of the Torah is going to begin with the words, Ve'ela hadvarim asher diber Moshe kol adat ben Israel be'ever Yarden. These are the words that Moses is going to speak. Somewhere along the next 40 years, Moses gets words. And by the way, how old is he in this story? In this story, in our story, he's 40. He's going to die at 120. Right, no, he's 80 already. He's going to die at 120. This is 40 years before that. He's 80. You don't learn anything until you're 80. Right? This is what Moshe is going to find words. Don't give up. Come on. Moshe is going to find words. That's a beautiful idea, by the way. Your education doesn't start till you're 80. Gornish, you know from before that, right? Right? He's going to find words. He's going to suddenly find words, right? And that question of do I have words, that's going to be one of his problems all through the story. Because every time he gets upset, what does he do? He loses his words and he hits things. He sees the Egyptian beating the Hebrew. All he needed to do was do what? Order the guy to stop. But he doesn't order the guy to stop. He says nothing and beats the guy to death. He's going to be words don't work for him. Words don't work for him. He lives in a world of slaves. Words don't work for him. So he says, you want me to go talk to Pharaoh? What do I know from talking to Pharaoh? Words don't work in my world. And that's going to be part of his problem. He's going to be living in a world in which words don't work. Words are going to fail him. Yeah.
It's just significant that he doesn't say, I am that I am. He says, I will be. It's more like you have to go forward. You have to trust in the future. You have to, if will rather than I am is kind of like, you have to proceed. You have to go forward. You have to trust in going forward.
You know, there's something that many of you in the room know, which is what you just said, which is when you have a terrible loss in your life and you're grieving for somebody, the way that you know that you can heal is the first day that you can say, what am I going to do tomorrow? The mourner lives in the past and the present alone. They live in the past and they're locked into the present. The mourner cannot see tomorrow. I cannot imagine my life without him, her, them. They cannot imagine their life. The moment that the grief begins to heal is the moment when a person can say, here's what I want to do tomorrow. A slave is locked in the present tense. Because a slave, the one virtue of slavery, by the way, slavery is a horrible thing. There's one virtue. It's totally secure. Every tomorrow is exactly like every yesterday. But the slave who's able to say, I look forward to something tomorrow, is a person who has already begun to exit that state of mind and come into a brand new state of mind. Now, what's going to happen in the next chapter is exactly that. We have 3 different experiences of slavery, and the slavery is interesting, the way the Torah is going to portray it. Saw that in the first Torah portion, in Shmot, which was actually last week's Torah portion, the word was ro'eh. What do you see? Right? It's Moses sees, his mother sees, the birth mother sees, the adopted mother sees, Moses sees, and then God sees. And then God sees. When we turn to this week's Torah portion, which is Vaera, the word changes to shomea. Listen. And we're going to have the following problem. Nobody can hear. Nobody can hear. Nobody can listen. The first person who can't listen is Pharaoh. Take a look at 5:2, which is on page Yeah.
I think one of the keys to Moses' approach to Pharaoh
Yeah.
is the fact that God recognizes Moses' reticence and appoints Aaron as Moses' spokesperson. And the line in verse 16, in chapter 4:16,
Yeah.
is that it says that with you playing the role of God to him because Pharaoh is God personified in Egypt.
Yeah.
So there has to be something that is done to make the shepherd Moses, or the former prince, an equal to Pharaoh on the throne.
Right.
I think that's very important.
He's going to be an equal to Pharaoh. He's going to be, and there's a family connection between these guys, right? That's what the movie Prince of Egypt is about. But the Torah never references that. Pharaoh's his half brother, quarter brother, or something, right? Because this is not the Pharaoh whose daughter adopted him. This is the Pharaoh who came after that guy.
It's the princess's brother.
This is the princess's. This is his uncle, right, or his brother, depending on how the succession went. So this man who thinks he's God, I'll send you to be God to him. And now God's beginning to formulate the plan that the problem is going to be how to get Pharaoh off that throne. How do you get him to think of himself as not, challenge his godliness, as it were, the godness of the divinity of Pharaoh. Bill.
I think maybe God's anger is a reflection of Moses' humbleness, proving himself to God, because as you started out saying, first of all, his Jewish roots, his family ultimately become priests. He's the brother of the god of Egypt, and he's the son-in-law of the god of Midian. And most royalty or high, they're going to be fairly haughty. And here this guy is saying
He's in the God business, this fellow. Right? He really is stuck in the God business, right? So let's go again. His grandfather, who is his adopted father, is the god of Egypt. His uncle or brother is the god of Egypt. His father-in-law is the head priest of Midian. He's in the God business, right? Right? I know from gods. When he says to this God, who the heck are you? I know the Midian gods. I know the Egyptian gods. Like, who are you? Where have you been? What kind of God are you? And who the heck am I? Mi anochi. What's my role in this drama? I want to watch how words fail. So go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
I think the implies that I am unknowable to you.
Yeah.
Because you live only in the present. You understand the past. You know the past.
Yeah.
But you don't live. You don't exist in the future.
Right.
I exist in the future.
Right.
And you exist only in the moment, so you will never be able to understand me.
That's interesting. Or the opposite. This is where you need to go.
Yeah.
You need to start living in the future. Right? You need to start understanding that you have a future, that there's a teleology, you're going somewhere.
That you're going there, but you don't.
You don't know it, but you're going. Okay, good. Yeah, Ronnie.
It seems to me that the Pharaoh looks like Anwar's the guy. And the baby looks like a young Charlton Heston.
Okay.
They're different. They've got to make a difference.
All right. All right, ready? Take a look at page 338. Okay, so now we get to the encounter. You ready? We have a few minutes left. So just to recap, this was all like a recap, right? The story is about vision, and the way in which can mask the things that are right in front of us, but they become normal to us and we don't see them. And the question is, how do you open people's eyes to see what's right in front of them, particularly when it's their own selves, their own conditions? How do you tell a people you're slaves and I've come to liberate you, when their first response is we're not slaves and get the hell out of here? And that's going to be the question. Now we're going to get to the question of words, of hearing. One of the facts of culture, and particularly here in slavery, is that it breaks language. One of the conditions of slavery is the Zohar has this phrase of the slavery of language, the enslavement of language. That is, language doesn't work the way it's supposed to work. Take a look at chapter 5, page 338. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh. celebrate a festival for me. And Pharaoh, who is the Lord that me, Adonai? I don't know Adonai. I don't know you, God. It's seriously wonderful midrash. Scholars, look up this God. See if you can tell me something about him. Because they have the Department of Gods right there, and they have an encyclopedia of gods, you know. So the Buddha, let's see, Jesus, Muhammad. Oh, here he is. Can't find him. He's not in any of the encyclopedias, right? He's not on the radar. This is an unknown God. It's like, you know, one of these horrible things where there's a terrorist attack and some group takes notice of it, and the FBI says, we never heard of these guys before, right? Well, I don't know. Why should I listen to you? And they answered, the God of the Hebrews manifested himself to us. Right? Showed himself, called it. Let us go a distance of 3 days to pray. Moses and Aaron. And the king says, why do you distract the people? Get back to work. And they double the work. They tell them you have to go get your own straw. Right? And the people now are suffering even worse. So now we're on page 340. Now the foremen of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order, you must not reduce your daily quantity of bricks. And they left Pharaoh's presence, and they came to Moses and Aaron standing in the path. And they said to them, may the Lord look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in their hand to slay us. Why are you making trouble? Anybody ever remember the book Letters from the Birmingham Jail? Martin Luther King is sitting in the Birmingham jail, and he is condemned by the Birmingham Ministers Association. Why? Why are you making trouble? You know, for generations, black folks and white folks lived here in the South in peace. Why are you making trouble? It's not, of course there was peace. Black folks knew their place. White folks knew that. Well, every now and again you got to show them who's boss. But that's what happened. And he writes this letter from the Birmingham. Go get it online. It's online. You don't even have to buy it. It's free. And he writes and he says to them, you know, he quotes Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau refused to send his taxes to the Mexican War, and his father comes to see him. And Thoreau's father says, why are you in jail? And Thoreau says, why aren't you in jail? And King asks the Birmingham Ministers Association the same question. Why aren't you here with me? Why aren't you here with me? But the charge is, what are you making trouble for? What are you stirring up trouble for? Things are peaceful. We had a good life as slaves. Why did you have to make it worse? And suddenly, Moses begins to understand that same insecurity that comes back to him. Understand the vulnerability of his position right now, right? He belongs to nobody. The people don't want him. Pharaoh doesn't want him. Nobody wants him. May the Lord look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his court, putting a sword in their hands. And Moses returns to the Lord and said, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's dealt worse with this people, and still you've not delivered the people. Why'd you do this to me? That's the last one. And now God comes back and he says, I want to tell you something about me you don't know. I'm going to give you my personal name. And now look at page 353. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart. But Moses appealed to the Lord. The Israelites will not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me, a man of impeded speech? Nobody can hear each other. The Israelites cannot hear Moses. They have no faith in his mission. Moses cannot hear Moses. He has no faith in his mission. Pharaoh cannot hear Moses because he can't understand, what do you mean, let your people go? Your people are slaves. It's not even that it says according to his will. They are slaves. That's what they are. What do you mean, let them go? They can't be anything but slaves. You can't be it. That's what they are. Nobody can hear anybody in this story. So if the first parsha was about seeing, this is a parsha about a moment in which language fails everybody. Nobody can hear the other. Nobody can hear the other. And what is Pharaoh now? Now we're going to get the beginning of the narrative of the plagues, a little bit of a genealogy, right? And now look at page 356. It's a reiteration of Michael's idea. The Lord replied, chapter 7, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh with your brother Aaron as his prophet. You'll repeat all I command you. What is Pharaoh becoming now? And for the rest of this Parsha, Pharaoh is becoming the symbol of human unchangeability. Stubbornness, obstinacy, arrogance, it's everything in the world that keeps human beings stuck. That keeps human beings stuck. And as the narrative goes on, you'll see the plagues begin to come. And you keep wondering, even Pharaoh's court people wonder, why won't you change? Why won't you change? But he becomes stuck. Why do people become stuck in patterns of behavior that are so self-destructive? Why do nations become stuck in patterns so self-destructive? Anybody remember Lyndon Johnson? Anybody remember Lyndon Johnson? You know, and now the histories are, because all the archives are open, so the histories are being written. Lyndon Johnson knew that the Vietnam War was futile in 1965. Lyndon Johnson knew that every 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 boys that he sent to Vietnam, it wasn't. He knew it was. But once a leader proclaims a policy, we become stuck. You can't back out. You can't. Anyone ever had that as a personal issue? You ever gotten into a circumstance where you got so far in you can't back out? And you're so far in and you know that it's self-destructive, you know that this isn't going to get you what you want, but you just can't back out. Because if he backs out, he stops being God. He stops being God, loses face, right? Right? Yeah, go ahead. Bro. It's a form of slavery, right? It's a cognitive slavery. He can't back out, right? And over again, he's going to keep saying, relieve the plague and I'll do what you want. But he can't do it. He just can't do it. Mark, go ahead.
It's all true, and it's a cognitive dissonance, and it's a normal human trait, but you can't let God off the hook on this.
Oh, you want to put God back on it.
Because philosophically,
yeah,
it's an issue of moral accountability and free will.
Right.
If you have no free will, you're not morally accountable.
Okay.
And Pharaoh's heart was hardened.
Yeah.
It wasn't that Pharaoh hardened his own heart.
Well, the first 5 times he hardens
do
his.
that kind of
Yeah.
save God at all costs.
Right.
Exegesis do that.
Right.
But I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm retired.
You don't work for the boss no more, huh? Your retirement is vested. Yeah.
And it's the great philosophical problem of free will in the entire Torah.
Right. All right, so why? The Torah, the Torah tells stories exquisitely. Why did it need to evoke that idea, that God hardened his heart?
The most obvious reason is it doesn't believe in free will.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to see words as having meaning.
Right.
Now, or the idea that Pharaoh had become habituated to evil.
Right.
Which is your...
This is Maimonides' idea, right.
That's very cute. It's very
On behalf of the Rambam, I thank you.
It flunks ethics.
Right.
It flunks ethics.
Yeah, okay.
The idea of free will, after all, is a Enlightenment idea. It's not an ancient idea.
Right. So you're objecting to this, that in the narrative, the drama of the story, God turns Pharaoh into a prop.
Yeah.
This is theater. At a certain point, if God wanted his people out of Egypt, he could have just taken his people out of Egypt. The 10 plagues is theater. It's theater. And Pharaoh...
It's immoral theater.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. It's theater, and God wants to make a show to show the whole world that I'm God, that I'm not local, that I'm a God of slaves, that the God of slaves... All right, so he uses Pharaoh as a prop. He turns Pharaoh into furniture, right? There's a horrible article in the New York Times yesterday about a boxer who was almost killed in the ring. The guy smashes his face, and then the referee should stop the fight, but they let him keep fighting. The image is, pick him up and hit him again, and pick him up and hit him again, right? And that's the image that you get, and that's the immorality of the thing. Okay? So, but why is it?
Immorality is you can't be held accountable.
But why is it
For an
there?
act that wasn't free.
But why is it there? That's my question. Who told that story? Go a level high. Who told that story and why? Who needs that story to be told? Go ahead, Bobby.
Well, I've been sitting here with that question in mind the whole hour.
Good.
Because we're at a certain level discussing narrative.
Yeah.
And what it means.
Yeah.
But some group of somebody wrote this.
Right.
I want to know.
Okay, so tell me why.
They decided
Yeah.
to put in to come out with a certain outcome. Was it written, you can write in different ways.
Right.
You can outline the whole book
Right.
ahead of time, or you can just keep going, what happens, what happens, what happens.
No, you see, it's not what happens. This is too old a narrative to be that. This is a very, 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 very carefully constructed and articulated narrative in order to make certain points. So my question is, so why did we want to tell that story? Who wanted to tell that story? Stu?
I think in some way, God's role prior to this incident
Yeah.
was sort of a blank slate.
Yes.
So he had to prove himself to Moses, and he had to prove himself to the world.
Right.
And this whole theatrics, as you're calling it,
Yeah.
is a way of introducing, really, at this stage, the whole concept of God and the role of God.
Yeah. I wouldn't say concept, it's like personality of God. That's why when he says, what is your name? That's what the narrative is about. What do we know from God before? Creating God, choosing God, but you haven't had a God acting on this world stage. Here, what you have here is the beginning of history, is a God of history. And one of the problems with the notion of a God of history is what Mark's expressing, which is that if there's a God of history, where does that leave us? Are we actors in history, or are we just props in the drama? Right? And you can imagine a Jew sitting in Babylon, having witnessed the destruction of the temple, wondering, where is that same God now? Am I part of a narrative bigger than myself? Because at this point in the story, we know how it's going to come out, but the people and the characters don't. So the question is, if that were the way you saw yourself as part of a bigger drama, a bigger drama. Pop, go ahead.
Would the plagues be on the same level as we have in the Haggadah? Not with 50 plagues, but with 250 plagues?
The plagues are interesting. The plagues, first of all, it's a very highly articulated narrative. It's 3-3-3. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 10. The 10th one is there. And the first one is announced, the second one's announced, the third one's not announced. It's a very highly articulated thing. And then if you look at what gets done in each plague, you're attacking, for example, all the gods of Egypt. You're attacking the gods of Egypt, right? When the narrative says, you'll be a god to Pharaoh, he's attacking the gods of Egypt. You're attacking the Nile. You're attacking the fertility god, the frog. You're attacking the sun. All the gods of Egypt are attacked. The most interesting analysis of this is and we talked about this many times before. There are 10 plagues, right? There are 10 acts of creation. The 10 acts of creation. The 10 times God says, "Let there be" in Genesis. Match them up. That each of the plagues is an undoing of creation, right? It's an undoing of creation. So that at the end, what happens is Egypt is reduced to primeval, pre-created chaos. That's the idea. So the Hasidim come up with this beautiful drasha, which we have to finish with, which goes like this, right? You ready? The plagues are not punishments, says the Hasidic tradition. The plagues are consequences. God put 10 measures of divine light into the world, 10 measures of divine order and goodness into the world, and we human beings buried them all. As soon as you bury all that divine creation, what you do is you turn the world back into chaos. And each of the plagues is not a divine punishment, but it's the consequences of having buried those acts of creation into the world, right? You threw babies into the Nile. So the Nile runs with blood. You create a culture of blood, of murder, create a culture of class warfare, so that there are slaves whose children are murdered and tossed into the Nile. You have a river of blood running downtown. I mean, that's the idea. You destroy the boundaries of life. You end up with frogs everywhere. These are the undoings of creation. And then God says, I'm not going to fix it for you. I'll give you tools. The 10 Commandments come. And the 10 Commandments are the 10 tools you're going to need to put the world back together after the 10 plagues. So, here's your parlor game. Match them up. Match up each act of creation with a plague and the commandment that heals it. That's the Hasidic tradition. That will keep you busy at your Seder table for the whole night. Right? That will keep you busy for your whole night, right? Right? Thou shalt not murder is the answer to the river of blood which runs through your downtown, which is the undoing of man created in the image of God. Okay? That's the first one. I gave it to you for free. Now you get 9 more, and you win the $800 million. Have a good Shabbos. We'll see you next week.